So
Yeah.
if we go back to you scouring the internet, the world, hey, I need some devices to
Yeah.
help
Couldn't find
put this
comprehensive
in.
equipment.
Okay, so no equipment.
There is some equipment available by some people doing their best, and I have no, it just wasn't resonating as comprehensive as what I was understanding from all the old books. That's where I started. I started with old books, and I probably read them each 300 times before I even went looking for equipment to make sure I understood everything that was happening, and I would take each component of the system, each component of each antenna, and do weeks of research. Where did that component come from? Who's it named after? How'd they figure it out? What'd they use it for? What's it used for now? What's it been used for historically? Where did those minerals come from? All these things, every little detail, writing all this down for many times, for a year or two at this point on this one detail, trying to figure the equipment out because I really couldn't find equipment that had all the features. Just some very simple, like atmospheric electrical collection rods and, wire arrays and stuff that's on some of my equipment, but it just wasn't enough. There was no thermocouples. There was no magnetic core. There was all these features that I understood were integral to the original devices. And I was just looking for equipment more like that. That
What
made
year
sense
was
to me.
this?
This was when I was really starting to look for equipment was 2017, 2016,
Okay, so we're
probably
like
2016.
6, 7 years into this. So you're looking, you can't find it. So is the decision then, hey, I got to build it?
Well, not at first. I kind of am like, man, I guess I'll get some of this other stuff. Even tried to buy a couple things there in from Europe, and it's like even the sites weren't even letting me buy. It was almost like the universe was saying, "You're not getting anything from anybody else." Like, it was just wasn't happening. I was trying to buy stuff. I was reaching out, like so some time went by, kind of quasi frustrated with that, but not in any major way. I started really getting into the paramagnetic rock and compost, high capacitance soil building because I knew that that needed to be laid down fundamentally. And a lot of people in electroculture either aren't considering this heavily enough, in my opinion, or don't know to consider it. But, you're putting energy into something, into the matrix of soil, and you need to create a battery out of that soil, a living battery. So by adding that paramagnetic phase, and basically that can be, in my case, I use basalt. Hybrix basalt's a very paramagnetic rock, and you can even measure that paramagnetism on a machine called a PCSM, which was invented by a gentleman named Philip Callahan, who was an American farmer, um, and in conjunction with a gentleman named Bob Pike, I believe, and his daughter still runs their labs, which is Pike Agri Labs. And, you can view that machine on there, I believe. They are hard to get. They don't produce hardly any of them anymore, but they're still up on the site. So, in our case, we have limestone bedrock. It's very diamagnetic rock, which is meaning it's not inclined to magnetism, diamagnetic. Paramagnetic means it is inclined to magnetism. So, we're adding that, in the biodynamics world, we might call it like a cosmic rock. It has a yang energy, a male positive energy, electric energy. And even, I had read Immanuel Velikovsky's books on electrical geology years before this. And they all this book is talking about is how all the different rock formations of the world, rivers, all our geological features and anomalies were caused by very quick electrical spark gapping and generations between the Earth and the cosmos. And he has books. One of his books is Worlds in Collision, Earth in Upheaval. These are excellent books. Immanuel Velikovsky, Emmanuel with an I. And anyway, he talks about basalt being the basalt towers formations. I think they're in like the Southwest and the Utah region, and also up in like Vermont. There's a lot of basalt. Granite is also a very paramagnetic rock. Um, for instance, uh, talks about these rock formations being generated by mass electrical generations, and they just appear. And they recreate these formations in a lab with basically loose sand and electrical impulses. Um, You can watch a lot of videos about this. It's very interesting, electrical geology. Anyway, that came back into my mind too at this time. Oh, the basalt. Yeah, it's electrical rock. So when you add these basalt with humus, which is in the compost, the humus, is the organic matter of soils that's decayed sufficiently to have lost its identity. So basically, it's that degraded, imprintable carbon again. We're back to this imprintable carbon. Again and again, I'm seeing this kind of idea of birth from decay, spontaneous generations. Back in the day, they would, you had kind of a churchical dominated scientific community, and they would call it like, what was the word? Like abiogenesis, meaning kind of like you're saying that life came from nothing. But what they didn't understand, in my opinion, is that they just weren't looking at the right mother and father, because you have the energies of yin and yang. That's not nothing. They just manifest in many forms. Human beings is just one form that these energies manifest. Fire and water are another way. And when you combine fire and water, you make steam, and that's chi. The steam drives the train, not the fire or water alone, if that makes sense. So we're creating that energy in the soil with this negative and positive in the wire, which is the conductor. And it's
And
as
is it
simple as that.
so there's that saying, right, in a lot of organic agriculture, feed the soil, not the plants. Is this the case that electroculture benefits the soil, the plants then benefit from that improved soil, or is the
And
electroculture also affecting the plant?
I would say it's benefiting the soil, which is benefiting the plant, in my opinion of how it would work. I could see how you could see it otherwise, but in my personal view, I'm affecting the soil, which is affecting the plant.
The analog to that for
But it's a
human,
symbiosis. I mean, we can't separate the one from anything. We can't separate ultimately anything from anything
right,
being
right, because
all
the
one.
plants are
So,
feeding microbes in the soil, which then helps improve the soil
yeah,
and helps the plant, which feeds the
we're part of
soil.
that too.
Yeah.
So
Okay, so when you first when that first device shows up,
nothing showed up. I made my first device.
okay, make your first device,
Yeah.
install it.
Mhm.
When would you say you noticed something?
The next time that crop was planted, the results are drastically different. We've been watching the same crops in the same 1.5, 1 3/4 acres that we grow in. We grow in it year round, all the time, without rest. Our soil gets a lot of use. We take care of it, but I'm talking about the things a farmer notices that you can only notice as a farmer. And like I said when we were talking before, I make my living selling vegetables for my family, me and my wife and our son. We don't have employees. I make our deliveries to the restaurants myself. I wanted a very authentic experience with knowing my customers. I try to have as few customers as I can get away with while still selling what I need to sell. It's not a peripheral endeavor for me. I guess like you're saying, the first time you try it, you don't really know. It's a faith move and a lot of research. I'm gonna be honest. It really wasn't a move of faith. I was so confident in it that it didn't feel like a faith move. It felt like, okay, no, I've got to do this. I've been trying to do it for years. So I get my first device built. I'm pretty happy with it. I'm kind of like I spent so much time learning the concepts of what I needed to do to build that first antenna that was comprehensive and had all the features, and then some also proprietary features of mine that I'm super happy with. Just on a personal level, like I was just stoked, to like have something that I could now utilize for a system that is what I do for a living that our family depends on, right? So I installed the first system. Go
Let me
ahead.
pause you there. Was the first
Uh-huh.
antenna you made similar to the one that you have? I'm looking at your Instagram. It's you kind of
CW1.
holding it like this. It's like
Yes.
small, got a kind of corkscrew at the bottom with little
Are
like
there
finger
wires coming out the top?
wires at the top with one twisted wire with the ball on
Okay,
top.
that is actually my newest model, and that's called a petite. That's for houseplants, and it also connects to frequency generators for radionics induction of
All right.
elemental
So this is
nutrient.
this is CW4. Okay. So your first
That's
one was what?
exactly
CW
CW1.
CW1. Okay.
That's the
So
that's the main dude.
I'll get a picture of that one. We'll flash that up on
Thank you,
screen.
thank you. So yeah, this one is kind of my first model. It's very similar to my prototypes, although I did change up a lot of little things. And I work very closely with an electrical engineer who was at first just installing a kiln originally years ago for my wife who does pottery on the side as a hobby. And when he came to install, he starts looking around instantly, and his employee was like, "Oh man, he's gonna be hard to get to do any work." Because turns out what his real passion was gardening, farming. Actually, him and his wife have a small farm and sell a few staple crops to some local places. But he owns an electrical company, and before that, spent almost 45 years in industrial electrical systems. So his knowledge is vast, and he's also an avid organic gardener. So we had a lot to talk about. And we became friends, and he did the job for us. And I reached out a little while later. Actually, he reached out first and said, "Can I bring my wife? We want to do a tour." I said, "Sure, come on out." We hit it off. He had no idea still about the electroculture. I hadn't even breached that. He was just into the gardening. So when he was here on the tour, I start showing him this, and you see his eyes just get wide, his whole world opened up. And he realized that his 2 knowledge bases were gonna merge here, got excited about that because that's a big thing for people, when you go off and you learn these things that are seemingly separate and they merge into this synthesis of, like, beautiful work, And he, very interested personally. Long story short, we form a relationship. I reach out, I'm like, "Come pick my stuff apart." He brings out these $7,000 meters of all sorts, resistance testers, all kind of testers I can't even explain, they're so advanced, and I had him go through my antenna designs, find the flaws, find the flaws in my installs. He helped me out a lot. Mostly what I learned through that experience was really a lot of insulatory, tips on the installs. That was where I needed help at the time. So I got a lot of good data on that, went through some details of electrical soldering that I was interested in refining. Man, just really picked everything apart. For the most part, they were solid, but I refined them with his help. He's since then, like, switched everything over to Electroculture himself. I'm doing some installs with him this fall, making some antennas for him, some more stuff. But anyway, I was really like, "Come pick this apart." And we started talking about it, and then I had already been thinking, I mean, this is electromagnetic induction at its core. There's a lot of factors going on, but at its core, because you have certain components of the antennas, like the thermocouple, that use what's known as the Seebeck effect. And when dissimilar metals of different temperatures interact, touch each other, and arc together, they create feeble voltage, 30 millivolts. That goes into the system every time the temperature is variant, like 10 degrees cooler or hotter. So you have those kind of other functions that are just directly producing feeble voltage, but at its core, it's electromagnetic induction. And I proposed that to him, and he thought for a minute, and he was like, "That's it. That's what you're doing. That's electromagnetic induction at its most just elegantly simple form."
And on these, I mean, they don't look too long. How tall is one from tit to 2 feet?
The antenna itself.
Yeah.
So the antenna body is based on all the measurements on these devices are based on the sacred cubit, so that the biogeometry of the device is just in a static position is harmonious. That's just a little bit of something that's a proprietary addition. None of the original antennas included that type of thought, but I wanted the intention and the thought on every single piece to have a function and a purpose. So the body of these antennas is half sacred cubit, which is 10.30 inches.
And then that
A little
includes the little rods up top?
That's just the body. Then the rods extend to make the whole unit itself, I see what you're asking, is approximately 2 feet tall.
Okay. And then again, I'll put a picture up on the screen here for people who are watching this. At the bottom,
That's the lead wire
okay, lead wire. I was gonna
that
say,
you
oh my
would
god.
connect your ground wire to with a coupler.
Okay. So that you wouldn't install this directly into the ground, would
No,
you?
that goes 25 feet up on a pole.
And then a wire runs off the bottom of that, and then the
Yep.
wire runs
Runs
through the ground.
down Goes down the pole through ceramic insulators or other type of insulators, traditionally ceramic, and then into the ground about it's a varying depth between, let's say, 10 and 16 inches, depending on how deep your tillage is going to be. If your tillage is going to be at 10 inches, you're safe to put it at 12 or 14 inches. So you can kind of see what I mean. It's the
Got it.
depth. You just want it to be in the rhizome layer of your plants, basically.
So I'd say, okay, antenna relatively small. If you grew up in the
Yeah.
80s, you've seen the old school satellite antennas
Oh,
that are
oh
like 10
gosh.
feet
Yeah.
across, right? So
This
like
is nothing like that.
that's a satellite dish. This is
Yeah.
small. So how I say that because you have what I would visually say is a
Mhm.
relatively small receiver.
Mhm.
But I mean, we look at our iPhone, right? Like there's no antenna there.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um,
Size is not
not necessarily an indicator of potence in many
right.
ways. Um, how big of an area could
Mhm.
one of these cover?
Okay, that's easy to answer. Infinite distance south to north because that's how you run the wire. You can run that wire if you had a 20 feet approximately east to west. These are all installed. The lines will always run south to north in these systems, regardless of if that's a diagonal line or if that's straight in line with your crops. They need to flow with the telluric current. Telluric current flows through air, land, water, concrete, everything.
And
The
that's
brass,
magnetic north?
magnetic south to magnetic north, exactly. Magnetic. Because in the old days, direction orientation is based off the term orient, which means east. And so you would determine your direction from the rising sun. So that's actually a variable condition. So we use magnetic north to south. That's correct. So you check it with a compass.
Does the soil have to be wet for this to be effective? I ask because, drier climates like I'm in here in Southern California, I mean,
Hmm.
if you're not irrigating,
Hmm.
the top layer of soil can just totally dry out. And,
Totally.
and, and I think, okay, no water, no conductor of electricity. Is that valid or no?
It is valid to a point. It will work without it being constantly wet. Most certainly. It will actually, electrolysis produces its own moisture. So factor that in.
So I put
Also, when you organize the molecules in the soil, the ionization, the organization, the structuring, you have a porosity and a soil texture that holds moisture better. I have farmers that come that have been farming in this region, literally like next door to me and down the road for much, 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 much longer than me. And they come and they grab the soil. And these are traditional farmers that use big disc plows and stuff like that. And they come and they grab the soil, they don't recognize it because the porosity, and it'll have just rained like 7 inches. Let's say we get a lot of rain. It's raining today. We get a lot of rain. And the soil will be like wet, but fluffy. It has porosity, but also retains water well. It's because it's structured. It's structured from the electricity.
and part of that is you have a tooth. You kind of have a two-part solution. You apply the basalt rock dust to the
With
soil,
compost.
so through the compost. So you have a media that's primed per se to accept the tool, where if you just apply the tool to regular soil, not necessarily as effective.
Um, sure. I mean, that's kind of like saying, like, why wouldn't you do everything that would be in your favor? Okay. So, like I own a paper pot because it's awesome for a handful of my crops. I don't know what I would do without it at this point. But that doesn't mean that it takes the place of some other stuff or that I
Right.
wouldn't have something else because I have the paper pot that is also effective at its job, if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
So it's a tool, and you install these systems. After they're installed, there's no maintenance. So, for a farmer, you're like, well, I install this. You're going to use way less inputs. You're going to have all this nitrogen become available. You're going to not have that ammonia locked up in your soil. You're going to, if you want to even get into the deeper levels, you're going to support the industries of death and war less through needing less of those materials. Um, you're going to structure your soil for better water retention, porosity, and also create a level of moisture with the electrolysis going on in the soil. So that's to speak on dry soil. But yes, moist soil is going to always conduct electricity better, for sure.
Can't find the picture now, but I was looking at one of the ones you installed, and it looks like you dug a trench, you lay the wire
Uh-huh.
into the trench, and around the wire, there was, some sort of
Magnets.
packet. Okay, yeah, what's going on there?
So those are magnets that are in phase or stacked the same way. Um, thickly coated in beeswax. Those are ring magnets, so they have a hole in the center, little donut magnets. There's 6 of them in the stack, and then they're coated in beeswax thickly just to protect them, basically. And also, the center gets coated and filled with beeswax. So when you slipped your ground wire through those magnet stacks through the center, they are around your ground wire in periodicities down the line. There's no, exact rule of how often to put them. I put them as often as I can, like, it's kinda one of those things, like, the more the better. So, if you have a 100-foot ground line, it'd be great if you had 20 on there, but if you had 5 on there, that's awesome too. It's just the more the better because that's just more electromagnetic induction. That's more magnets interfacing with the conductor hooked to a positive and a negative, which is fluxing. So you're just getting more inducted voltage down your line, and they're just to boost the system.
And it's essentially and
I'm combining that. That is not from traditional electroculture from the 1800s. Some people call those earth magnets, and they're used for what I'm using them for, but I'm using them on the ground lines with electroculture systems. Just combining things that are all benevolent and harmonious.
so a pretty scalable system, right? Like, because in theory,
Very.
you put in one antenna and you get as much linear length of wire as you need to run.
Yep, exactly. So depending on your layout, like I've been doing a schematic for a farm up north that has 3 pretty large gardens, 300-400 feet by a couple 100 feet. Luckily, 2 of them are oriented north to south, so they can use way fewer antenna heads on these north to south, where the north and south length is the long ways, than they will on the one garden that runs east to west. They'll need more antenna heads to cover that space because the lines are all run south to north. So there's those variables. You can get lucky, and realize that, man, I have this huge space, but I only need like 3 or 4 antennas to cover it all because it's all running long ways south to north. Or you can realize, like, all my original gardens were created without this in mind. So some of them are like perfectly lined up, and then some of them have diagonal lines going through greenhouses. It's whatever needs to be in line with the current. That's what's important. That's what's effective. Better to have fewer lines run properly, fewer antennas run properly, than to have a bunch of them not set up properly.
So say you had a bed block that's 100 feet wide, and then let's say it's perfect north-south orientation, length doesn't matter. It sounds like so how what's the distance between lines across that
5
100
antennas you would want on 100 feet,
so
basically
they get
20 feet,
20 feet apart?
20 feet apart, a 20-foot swath, and that will capacitate wider with time, um, and over time. Like, even in all the original books about electroculture, it says, like in Crystal Flu's book, he has a whole couple pages of kinda just notes, you know, random things to keep aware, like make sure your brass pointers face exactly magnetic south. That's the most critical thing about the function of the telluric collection, because then you're in line with that current. The magnets behind that brass rod are in that same phase, so they're drawing in that same energy flow. That's one note. Another note is that when you install your system, you should give it, like, let's say, 1 season to capacitate that energy into the soil. Although I do see that, at least in our area where we do have plenty of moisture, and I'll add that back in as a possible addendum and a possible reason for this, but they seem to capacitate and work very quickly. We've been planting the same shishito pepper variety, had been planting it for like 8 years, pretty good yields. They sell really well. Um, I've just been adding and adding these lines on my own farm as I can over the years, more and more and more. But you have to wait till you have empty spots. You got to wait till you're in between crops here. I bought a trenching chainsaw so I can install lines in like 1.5 inch wide trenches between crops when I want to. Just because I'm trying to do this on a on a scale and be able to install for other people if possible and stuff like that.
What's the rough cost if somebody wanted to do this on an acre? And let's say everything was lined up perfectly.
An acre? What is an acre in like a square foot? It
Like
would,
200 by 200 about.
200 bucks. So you'd have 200 feet. So that would be 10 antennas. If you're using you'd use the CW1 antennas for this type of application. The other models, they're all kind of interchangeable, but they all have specificities and particular uses that they're designed for. Um, but yeah, you would need 10 antennas. So that would be about $3,000 for the antennas. And then you would need enough ground line, which is a nominal at that point, like probably a couple $100 in wire.
Is that just like off the roll Home Depot wire?
Yeah, like, I mean, Tractor Supply type places.
Just
I'm
wire,
not a
wire,
real
like
a it's tw
normal
if
wire.
I'll tell you exactly what it is. It's 12.5 gauge galvanized steel, not aluminized. You're gonna find that a lot, and they usually keep it like if you go to, like, a Tractor Supply type store, that galvanized wire is gonna be outside. What you're gonna find inside is typically smaller rolls of galvanized at smaller gauges and aluminized wire at 12.5 because that's what they use for, like, dog fences and stuff.
Mm.
So and it's way more expensive. The galvanized steel is a zinc-coated wire. That's what galvanized is. So that's good. Galvanized steel, yeah, 12.5 gauge is traditional ground line. That's what Justin Christopher used. That's what I use. That's what most people in electroculture use. You don't have to use that. You could use something a little smaller, definitely thicker, but that's the rule of thumb. That's the wire we use traditionally, and it is inexpensive.